Well, we've certainly spent a lot of time here on this channel looking at the Seattle Seahawks offseason, all the moves they made in the draft and free agency. But today we're going to take a look around the rest of the NFC West at the Seahawks' three opponents. And to do that, I am enlisting some help. I was fortunate to get some time today with Justin Melo of the Draft Network, maybe the hardest working man in the business. He's been doing as much heavy lifting since the draft as he did before it. Now we're going to take a look at the heavy lifting done by the Seahawks opponents, assessing the other three teams in the NFC West, who had the best offseason of them, and how does it all shake out at the end of the day. Joining me next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Good to have you back. Hope you all enjoyed your Memorial Day weekend. Took a few days off myself. Jumped back in yesterday. If you haven't checked that video out, please do. I highlight 3 games on the schedule that I think are especially crucial and will tell us perhaps the most about who this Seahawks team is in 2025. Check that out as well. Before we get to my conversation with Justin, really excited to announce the new Patreon page. A number of you have signed up already. Thank you for doing that. And out of today's interview, there will be some bonus content only for Patreon members. So if you want to sign up over there, there is a free trial associated with the 3 upper tiers. You can click that link down below in the description and check that out. Would love to see you over at Patreon. Going to be a lot of bonus material, a lot of things I can do over there that I just can't do on YouTube because of copyright issues. So wink, wink, nod, nod, a little bit of a hint about what you might be able to look forward to over there as well. In the meantime, hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's the best way to support the channel. If you listen on audio, also make sure you're following or subscribing, depending on which platform you use. And if you could leave a rating or review, that would really help as well. And then all the other ways that you could help contribute or donate are linked down below, as well, as I am a full-time independent content creator. So your support is much appreciated. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, as always, as well, because even if you don't want to get notifications from YouTube, which you can by hitting the bell, I'll always post everything on Twitter, and so you'll always know when there's new content. But here's the current content. Justin Melo of the Draft Network joining me today to talk about the opponents the Seahawks will face twice each around the rest of the NFC West. Here we go. Well, Justin, the last time I saw you, it was before the draft, and you would think that that's the busiest time of the year, but my goodness, looking at the Draft Network website, it's almost as if you're more prolific now. What is it like for you as a writer? We talked a little bit about this before I hit record, dealing with May and June, kind of the dog days of the offseason over there at the Draft Network.
You know, it's really fun at the Draft Network, even those dog days, because what we're into now is kind of analyzing some of these prospect team fits. And we're fortunate to operate in the space where we can get a little more niche than most of your, mainstream content creators, if you will. For example, I've got a story that went live yesterday on Mitch Evans, who a tight end that Panthers drafted in the 5th round. These are the fun things that we get to do this time of year because we're not so worried about what everyone else is producing. I've got one coming out today on the 13th last player drafted, which was Washington Commanders running back Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. So it's fun to analyze these niche fits, try to start handpicking these later round picks that might have a bigger impact than people initially believe. And then we can go, when September, October rolls around, we could go back into May and say, hey, we tried telling you so. If you were reading our content back in May and June. So we just completed draft class evaluations for all 32 teams. So if you head over there, just plug in Seahawks into the search bar. I've got like 1,000 words article on every single Seahawks pick, how I feel they fit. I did that for all 32 teams. And we're about to start working on one of the summer series that we do that I really enjoy. Separate articles for every team. So 64 articles is a breakout player for every team and a guy entering a make or break year. So that breakout player tends to be a second-year sophomore, a guy I think take a step. That make or break, usually a third-year guy that hasn't shown enough promise, in year 1 or year 2, hasn't met expectations. That's a lot of fun to work on every year as well. And we're getting into our summer scouting series. A head scout, Keith Sanchez, organizing the troops, Ryan Fowler and all the great people we have over there in the scouting department, getting ready to start what will be a busy season for us for the 2026 draft.
Yeah, Keith has already posted his, too early 2026 mock draft. I'm going to throw each team's top pick up there just for fun at the end of this. And then because we've already spent so much time here on the channel getting outside opinions on what they thought of the Seahawks draft class, I'll link that down below in the description. But we'll circle back around at the end and kind of get your thoughts on how the Seahawks fit into all this, because I wanted the focus today to be on their opponents and start to look at what the division looks like as a whole. And while so much of the focus with all sorts of creators and writers has been on the draft class, I want to look at the offseason kind of in a vacuum for each team as an aggregate. And so let's just start at the top. Who do you think, as far as the Seahawks opponents go, the other three teams had the best offseason overall, draft and free agency?
Yeah, this is an interesting conversation to me because, and I'll include the Seahawks in this part of the evaluation. I don't think any of them, totally hit it out of the park, but I don't think any of them had disasters either. And we'll talk about the Seahawks at some point because I know some people are painting them as maybe a little doom and gloom based on the offseason. I don't agree with that at all. Not at all. But if I had to pick one of them that had the best offseason, I'd probably go with the Arizona Cardinals. And I know Seahawks fans may not love hearing that, but let's keep in mind, they were probably also the one that had the most pressure to have the best offseason, right?
And the most work to do. Yeah.
Right. There was more work to do. I know they didn't finish last in the division last year. I believe they finished third, right? If memory serves me correctly.
Yeah.
But certainly they're the team that's most, that really feels like the worst team in the division, certainly over these last couple of years, rebuilding and all that. Well, now they've reached the point where they think they're ready to take that next step. And by next step, I mean they think they're ready to win 8-9 games, right? Just kind of compete. You want to be in it week 14, 15, 16 and onward. That hasn't been the case for them in recent years. That's where they're trying to get to, I think, next, right? It's baby steps. So they had to have the best offseason out of these four teams, and I think that they did. And now a lot of what they did could backfire. Don't get me wrong, right? And we'll get into some of that. Like the draft specifically, high risk, high reward, right? If it doesn't work out, it's going to flame out hard for them, right? I mean, you look at the top 5 picks on that list. Walter Nolan, the first rounder out of Ole Miss, had some character questions, alleged maturity concerns coming out. I thought he was a first-round player from a talent perspective on tape. They go ahead and roll the dice and take him. One of the things that I really like that they did, by the way, to couple with that move, and I guarantee you, knowing a little bit about Monty Ossenford and how he operates, this isn't a mistake. Well, you're bringing in a guy like that. What helps? Let's bring in a guy that's the ultimate pro's pro, Calais Campbell, right? And put him in that same room and make sure that Walter Nolan has a veteran that he can lean on. Right now, look, that's not to say that's not a foolproof plan, right? Like Walter Nolan can say, go to hell with Calais Campbell's advice. Some of these guys, you just can't get through to them. And I've seen that happen, covering Titans. Isaiah Wilson, one of the worst first round picks in recent memory. Like there are just some guys you can't get through. I don't know which way Walter Nolan's going to go, but I know you're giving him the best chance, right? To go the right way by giving him someone like Calais Campbell to lean on. And then Dalvin Tomlinson, who you've got up here as a key free agent addition, pairing those two guys, that's going to guarantee there's not too much pressure on Nolan in year one. So I think that's going to help. They've been trying to piece together a pass rush for years, and that will displease a defensive-minded head coach like Jonathan Gannon, who once had a 70-sack unit, right, with the Philadelphia Eagles as their DC. You bring in Josh Sweat. I thought that was a good, worthwhile deal, and I thought the price was relatively fair, just a little under $20 million a year for a darn good pass rusher. So they did a lot that I like. Jordan Birch in one of those later rounds as well, the edge out of Oregon, gives them another body in there as they continue trying to figure out if Darius Robinson is going to give them what they need. Whole entire rookie year derailed by injury. They had BJ Ojulari out with an ACL all of last year. Important to add bodies to that room. I think Josh Sweat and Jordan Birch does that. Gives them a good nucleus to work with, especially when you pair with how they improve the interior, right? The aforementioned 3 names that I just threw your way. And then Will Johnson in the second round, taking me back to the risks in the draft, right? This is a guy that I had a top 10 grade on overall as a player. He ends up sliding a little bit, due to the injury, the lack of a 40 time led to questions about the long speed. I feel a lot better about this risk than I did and I like Walter Nolan, But I just didn't share the same concerns about Will Johnson that majority of the masses did. Now, I can't say that from an injury perspective because I didn't have
Sure.
access to the medicals, right? That plays a big role. But some of the other questions that came up, I didn't see, like questions about his long speed. When you turn on the tape, I was extremely comfortable with the player on tape as a blue chip prospect. So I thought the Cardinals probably had the best offseason they needed to. There's other questions there. The interior, the offensive line, what does Isaiah Adams look like at right guard? Still a young player. Marvin Harrison's got to take a step. I was a little inconsistent last year. Of course, expectations were probably a little unrealistically high. He had a good year, not the elite year that he was projected to have. He's got to take a step as a sophomore. I think they probably need more from Trey Benson at running back, as James Conner now in the twilight years of his career. But this is a good quality offseason, and I do think this team is ready to win, 8-9 games.
Yeah, obviously the focus was on defense. Their first 5 picks all on that side of the ball, as Jonathan Gannon would be the first to admit, was the need on this roster. Certainly, it's been described elsewhere as a boom or bust, low floor, high ceiling draft. You seem to agree with that, but if it works out for him, the risk will certainly be worthwhile on Will Johnson, because you may look back if the knee holds up a couple years from now and say, hey, we got two first round talents out of this draft, and a roster that's as young and has as many holes in it as theirs. They needed to do that. But if they did the job that they think they did in filling out the rest of this roster and elevated the floor of this team and put them in a position to have a winning record, that's going to put more pressure than ever, even on the quarterback, right? And I know we're here to talk about the offseason, but I have my thoughts on the quarterback. And ultimately, if they fix the roster, then it's just going to put more on his plate. What are your feelings about Kyler Murray and the type of player you think he can be?
I think Kyler Murray's comfortably in that bucket where he's a darn good quarterback that's tough to replace, right? It's hard to find better than Kyler Murray. Now, it's probably always going to be a bit of a roller coaster, right? There's stretches that look downright elite where he's a top, 8-9 quarterback in the NFL. And then there are stretches where you question if he's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL. Now, I think he's comfortably in that, probably, 14 to 18 range is where he ultimately settles. That's the way they've paid him. And again, that's always in that bucket where it's tough to get better than that, right?
Yeah.
And it's also tough to consistently win and be a playoff contender with that as well. But I think Kyler Murray's a good quarterback. It's probably always going to be a bit frustratingly inconsistent. There are going to be plays on tape that drop your jaw, and that could go either way. There are times where you're going, how the heck did he make that throw? And then there are going to be times where you say, why did he make that throw? Right? A little bit, turnover prone on occasion. But ultimately, I think he's in that bucket where, do you win because of this? Is a question I always ask. We have this debate on the Draft Network all the time. Do you win because of Kyler Murray, or do you win with Kyler Murray? I think he's the frustrating evaluation where he's probably somewhere in the middle, where he can win you games occasionally. But I do tend to lean towards that you win with Kyler Murray. And there is a need to build up that roster around him in order to be a consistent, 9 to 11 win team, let's call it, because that's what they're trying to get to. I think 11 might be a little lofty this year, but you're starting to try to reach that floor of being an 8-9 win team. I think they'll get there this year, but I do think with Kyler Murray at quarterback, if everything else is where it should be, that you can be a consistent, 10-11 win football team.
And then I found this interesting. You wrote about this on the Draft Network. That wide receiver room, you touched on Marvin Harrison. I mean, he was probably never going to be able to live up to the hype that he had coming into last year. But when you look at the numbers, even though it was a little maddeningly inconsistent for Cardinals fans, I'm sure the overall numbers, he was a productive player, and you would expect him to take a step in his second season. But they didn't really address it. Certainly not in, they added Zay Jones in free agency for some depth. They've got Michael Wilson, who's shown flashes now entering his third year. But you have an interesting idea. You're looking at potential fits for Amari Cooper, who's still a free agent, and you listed the Cardinals as one of 3 teams he'd make sense for.
Yeah, when I look at that wide receiver room, you said it. I mean, if you go back to mock drafts, even in April, a lot of people had the Cardinals taking a receiver in the first round. That shocked me a little. I didn't go that route because of Marvin Harrison Jr. last year. But on the flip side, it also surprised me a little that they didn't really, they didn't draft one. If you got their top 5 picks there, all being defensive players. So I was a little surprised that they didn't pour a little more capital into that position this offseason. I like Michael Wilson. I think he's capable of taking another step, but he probably comfortably settles in as like a number 3 receiver on most NFL teams, whereas they're asking him to masquerade as a number 2 in Arizona this year. Now, what helps take some of the pressure off both of them is having a high volume pass catcher at tight end, right? And they have that in
Right.
Trey McBride. So that's
Absolutely.
probably partially why they didn't see the need to invest too much capital into the position this offseason. But I look at this team as, again, as one that's ready to take another step. It's obviously a great place to live, a great state to live in. Amari Cooper's got some ties, geographically to that part of the country. As he waits for the right opportunity here to arise, I think Arizona could be one of those spots that makes sense for him. Now, there are several others that will make sense for him, and of course, that'll help determine where he ends up. But as a guy like that, I'd be very intrigued about the possibility of playing for an on-the-rise team in a beautiful part of the country, a warm part of the country, with an exciting quarterback, an outstanding young receiver that you could mentor and play off of. And again, I think they could use a bit more. I'd say the same for a guy like Keenan Allen, who might even make more sense, because, Marvin Harrison, there might be a little, overcarry there with the way that they play the position and the spots that they prefer to occupy. Whereas you bring in a guy like Keenan Allen, who's going to play the slot, that's not really going to interfere, right, with what Marvin Harrison Jr. likes to do and play from. So I think there's an opportunity for here for them to add a veteran receiver at some point before training camp, and Amari Cooper's as good as any of them out there.
All right, let's move down your list. Who had the second best offseason of the Seahawks opponents in the division?
This is tough, and I'm almost glad you're omitting the Seahawks from this question, because I'd almost say it's a three-way tie, right? Like this is not easy, in my opinion, because I really think they're almost all, including Seattle, all on a pretty level playing field. The one that I'll go with is the Los Angeles Rams, and some of that is for what they accomplished in-house as well, right? The whole Matthew Stafford thing could have played out a lot worse than it did. They end up retaining him. They were, they're the reigning champions. They remain in win now mode. You've got a pretty easy direct pathway to being a contender again, because you kept your veteran quarterback, right? That was really important. They kept Alaric Jackson, the left tackle, who's been a difference maker for them up front. Of course, Devontae Adams is a pretty big addition. Now, I'll say this, as intriguing of an addition as that is, I don't know how much better the receiver room got. I do think he's got a bit more juice left, or a bit more gas left in the tank than Cooper Kupp does. But when you add Devontae Adams and you subtract the Cooper Kupp and you subtract the DeMarcus Robinson as well, who made some plays for them last year, I have a tough time saying that this room is 5 times better than it was last year. I think it'll be a little better than it was last year because, again, Devontae, I think, has got a bit more left than Cooper Kupp does. But that was obviously a big addition for them. I look at what they did in the draft. We'll talk about the pick that they added. But Terrence Ferguson, I don't know if I said it on your show. I think I might have. But I said it on every show that I went on that I thought he was a bit of a better prospect than he was getting credit for. And I did think he was going to go in the second round. So it was very interesting that the Rams made him their first pick after moving back. I could talk for an hour probably about Terrence Ferguson, but what I'll say is athletic testing is as important to any position in the league at tight end as any. As I butchered that a little, but it's as important to the tight end position as any.
I knew where you're going
in the NFL, because if you look historically speaking, athletic testing does a really, really accurate job forecasting future success for tight ends, more so than any other position in the NFL. It is almost, you look at Travis Kelce, all of them tested well throughout the pre-draft process. Terrence Ferguson, if you're familiar with the relative athletic score, I think everyone is nowadays, RAS, wonderful creation by MathBomb over there on Twitter. He's got Terrence Ferguson scored a 9.20 out of 10, for what he did at the combine throughout the pre-draft process. I think there's some untapped potential there in the passing game. Didn't produce as much as he could have in a high octane offense like Oregon, who didn't really have any, the receivers, I think both went undrafted or seventh rounders, if memory serves me correctly. So some untapped potential there, but he's also really good in line. I think that's what makes him unique, is this is a guy with athleticism, untapped potential in the passing game, but he can also come downhill, play wide, block you in the trenches sort of thing. So really intriguing football player. Josiah Stewart will add some depth to the edge room. I look at Jarquez Hunter. I don't know if you've seen on Twitter lately, like Sean McVay was over the moon with this pick. I think at one point he called him his favorite player in the draft. I mean,
I've seen that clip. Yeah, super
intriguing. He's going to, I don't know if this is a bold prediction anymore. He's the number 2 this year. I think they're going to admit rather quickly that Blake Corum was a mistake. And I think he's going to replace him rather quickly as the number 2 behind Kyron Williams. So Pretty good offseason. Now, there are some concerns here as well. I think the biggest one, well, first of all, inside linebacker is always a concern here, I think, because they don't care about it, right? They just don't
Right.
value.
Yeah. We know that here in Seattle, we have Ernest Jones now as a
Yeah,
result.
and I didn't understand them moving on from him to begin with when they traded him to the Titans. He's a really good football player. I thought he was fantastic for Seattle, down the stretch last year. Was it 94 tackles in 12 games or something along those lines?
Yeah, he helped that turnaround for sure. He
Big time.
spearheaded that.
And he got a good extension this year, a worthwhile one,
Mhm.
one that he earned. In LA, it's always a question. Troy Reader and Omar Spites, one of them's a UDFA, the other's a below average veteran. But when you look in the secondary, I think they feel they can get by at off-ball backer because they've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
The secondary is the big question, right? They reunite with Darius Williams. I think I got it right here. He's 32 years old. Not a very good age for a cornerback, right? Like usually those things tend to fall off when you're on the wrong side of 30. I like, a guy like Quentin Lake, and I like Cam Curl at safety. But every other spot's just a big question mark for me. With Darius Williams, Akello Witherspoon, again, like these are below average veterans past their prime. What are you getting out of Kobe Durant, Darion Kendrick, who I think's a little outperformed the expectations based on, if you recall, he had the historically poor testing throughout the pre-draft process, and it's why he ended up going undrafted when he was like a third or fourth round. I think he ran in like the 4.8s, if I recall correctly, at corner. It's just a big no-no. But there are huge questions in this secondary, right? Cameron Kitchens. I mean, I think they're one of a bottom 10 secondary in the NFL, which is why they're being linked to a reunion with Jalen Ramsey, right?
Yep.
Which brings us to our next point. And look, again, a guy who's probably slightly past his prime. Does he come in and be the best corner on this roster? Yes, absolutely. I would say that's the case instantly. So if they could make that work, that's going to help remove some of the concerns here. As of now, this defense is obviously over-reliant on its defensive line, and it's a phenomenal one. There's no doubt that they hit that draft out of the park last year. I mean, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, they might have been number 1 and number 2 for defensive rookie of the year. Anytime you do something like that, you've had a truly special class, right? You had Kobe Turner in there. I mean, Byron Young is a phenomenal football player. So this is the way that they have flipped this depth chart on its head following Aaron Donald's retirement. They had a couple of veteran guys in there, alongside Aaron Donald that were really productive who are no longer there. The way they did, it's just an unbelievable job by GM Les Snead. But again, I think the rest of the defense, linebacker, secondary is a bit of a concern. But, being able to retain a Matthew Stafford, bringing in some star power like Devontae Adams, re-signing your franchise left tackle. They've got some ascending guys on the interior. Steve Avila is I think, has the chance to be one of the better guards in the NFL. He's due for a bit of a bounce back year. I thought he regressed slightly a little bit. So I think he's going to keep growing, taking steps forward. But this is a good football team. I think they're set up to win, 10, 11 games once again.
And then maybe we look back in a couple of years and we look at this draft, and the best move that they made was trading out of the first round and picking up an extra first round pick next year, which I didn't think any team was going to be willing to do at all, just because of the projected strength, especially at the quarterback position and potentially some other premium positions in next year's draft compared to this one. More top end talent, it looks like at this point as we look ahead. And yet 2 teams were able to pull that move off, including the Rams. And the second they did that, as a Seahawk fan, obviously, and someone who covers the team, my initial reaction was crap, because we all know what that means, right? I mean, they have to at Matthew Stafford at his advancing age. He appears to be a guy that's going to be kind of on a year-to-year basis now as they move forward, even though he's got some new fresh money in his pocket. But I mean, they're with those 2 picks next year, they're squarely in the quarterback mix in that class, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, like you talk about being surprised. It's even more surprising when you're able to do that when your original pick was at 26 or 27.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, it's
usually not in the position to move back and pick up a future first rounder, but there's no doubt about it that they did that to be in the quarterback market. I mean, when I look at this roster, I wrote an article on potential landing spots in a trade for Will Levis the other day. Mm-hmm. And I listed the Rams because I said they're, in a good spot to take a chance on a young quarterback, a developmental one. But in truth, I don't think they're going to do it this year at all, right? Because that you've got those 2 picks in your pocket, and you just look at. They're telling you, they're tipping their hand, right, to go into this season with Matthew Stafford again, year-to-year basis, especially based on the whole offseason drama that they just went through together. and your backup quarterback is a 34-year-old Jimmy Garoppolo. Like,
Yep.
they don't even have a quarterback on that roster
Yeah.
that they can develop into the potential succession plan, right? Then I think that, the ship is almost sailed on Stetson Bennett, right? I mean, I think when they took him a little earlier than they should have, number one. And then that whole, stint on, what was it, the NFI list or the non-football.
Right. Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, that was it certainly insinuated that there was maybe some off-field difficulties going on there. I know there were some allegations about some off-field, maybe mental health difficulties that he was battling through. But certainly they know that they don't have the future answer at quarterback on the roster. They have aligned themselves 2 picks next year to go and get their guy. And they know, they're certainly hoping they're going to be a 10-11 win team again this year. You're not going to be in a position with your original pick to handpick your guy, but having that second pick in your back pocket. Now, it might be in the 20s as well, because it's coming from a good football team, a presumed good football team in the Houston Texans. These picks might be like 23rd and 27th overall next year, right? But the hope is that gives you enough ammo. You're not going to move up for QB1, I don't think, right, with those picks. But if I can get can I get up as far to 10? I mean, remember, the Chiefs moved up from like 27 to 10 for Patrick Mahomes, right? So can I come up to number 10 overall with those 2 picks? How early can I move? And again, we're projecting I hate this, but we're projecting there's 4 or 5 quarterbacks next year, right? That could be top 10, 11 picks. So if you're the Rams, maybe you're coming up for the Bo Nix of next year's class, the Michael Penix Jr., the JJ McCarthy, right? If this class is as good as that one, or you hope it is, you're coming up for that 3rd, 4th, or 5th quarterback.
Yeah, and just for fun, I'll show the viewers what Keith came up with. Hang on here. Thought we had this one. There we go. That's this is just a snapshot of what he's got the NFC West doing in his 2026 mock draft. And there you go. I think he has the Rams moving up to 10. I think that's exactly the example that you used there, taking Garrett Nussmeier, a guy who might end up being QB1, but at this point, you look at a guy like Lenore Sellers and the traits there, and you could see where Nussmeier might end up being 2 or 3. But just, didn't mean to get too deep into this. If Seahawk fans are wondering who Cassius Howell is, we can talk about that at another time. But just wanted to put that into perspective of what the Rams might do. And I think when they made that move, I don't think they were expecting that opportunity, first of all, because of the reasons that we outlined. And I think it changed their plan. I absolutely expected them to come out of this draft with maybe one of those tier 2, tier 3 guys. Yeah. And there were a couple of guys later in the draft that fit, not the least of which is I thought that Sean McVay is probably a guy that would have loved to have played with Jalen Milroe, who ends up going 92 to the Seahawks. Or Kyle McCord, a guy like that. So I think that was in their plans, and I would have expected that to happen. But as soon as they were able to make this move, they thought, okay, maybe let's just pump the brakes, use that at another spot. Because the one thing that does, I'll put it up there one more time, that stands out to me as their MO in this draft, whereas the Cardinals and 49ers, who we're going to look at now in a second, clearly were hunting need in the draft and trying to address some glaring issues on their roster. This looks as much as any draft that I've seen around the league as a best player available. Like they just went best guy on my board, regardless of need. Because if they had drafted for need, as you said earlier, there'd be a corner on this list, right?
Yeah, and it's a little surprising, right, when you put it that way. Tight end, it's obviously a non-premium position. You've got Tyler Higbee and Colby Parkinson on that roster already. Edge, again, of course, you always need more depth, but you've got a Jared Verse and a Byron Young. And then even, running, you're taking a running back when you've got one of the best in the league, and you used capital last year, right? Top 100 capital on Blake Corum. But the other thing on the flip side of that, I love arguing against myself, when you don't take a quarterback in the draft, right? When you have the opportunity to move down and you no longer have the need to take a quarterback in this class, that's an extra pick on someone that'll help you right away, right? And when you've got a 38, I think he's 38, a 38-year-old Matthew Stafford on the roster, you're in win now mode. You want to use as many picks as you can to help you win right now, right? So certainly as they shifted that strategy to that future first round pick, not having to take a quarterback this year, that does afford you the opportunity to take another player that could help you this year.
That leaves us with the 49ers, an interesting offseason for them. Lots of talk about cash versus cap and how much ownership wanted to dial back maybe on some upfront spending. And so not as active in free agency. They suffered some pretty significant losses there. Your take on what they did overall this offseason? I don't know why my graphics.
Yeah, an interesting one to say the least, right? I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I'll say this: when you talked about the cap, it's like the owner. He's been one of those guys that's been really willing. I wrote an article on it this morning. Actually, I thought it was really interesting, an exercise. He's been one of those owners that's willing to spend upfront cash to help with the prorated signing bonuses and dummy void years. Like in order to do that and circumvent the cap, if you will, there's a league-wide discussion going on about this right now. Roger Goodell recently talked about
they might be changing some of that.
Yeah, Roger Goodell talked about protecting the integrity of the salary cap. I'm just going to pull up a quick note for you here. The Eagles have been the biggest proponents of that in the league in recent years. And guess what? They just won a Super Bowl, right? And the Eagles had, I want to say it was 5 or 6 players this past year that led the league. They led the league in average salary per year at their position. Okay. Despite that, they had one guy who charged more than $15 million against the salary cap.
Yeah.
One guy. That's impossible. It's only possible if you circumvent the cap the way the Eagles do. And you add on dummy years and void years and you kick the can down the road, or then you restructure, yada, 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 right? So I've got a note here about the 49ers, okay? The 49ers rank first this year in dead money. And if you look at over the cap, $81.3 million, okay? That is crazy. Next year, going 2026, there is no dead money on anyone's books already on over the cap for 2027. You look ahead to next year, 2026, the Eagles and 49ers are second and third, respectively. The 49ers are first this year. So that tells you what Jed York's willingness has been to operate in similar ways, right? Circumvent the camp, kick cans down the road. When you have the year that they had last year, you're going to start to pull back on that spending as an owner, right? Because you're thinking, I didn't exactly get the return on my investment so much, right? Because people don't realize, like, there are such things as cash poor teams. There are not a lot of owners willing to put up cash flow immediately. That's what it takes to circumvent the cap. It's signing bonuses. It's actual cold hard cash immediately. So interesting discussion there about them scaling back a little. But to talk about their offseason, I think one of the first thing that jumps out at me, I'll start with the draft. Immediate pressure on Michael Williams to produce, in my opinion. This was a guy coming out of Georgia. I remember talking, this time last year, that he's a early favorite to be the number 1 pick in the 2025 NFL draft. That was what the scouts that I spoke with, at Pro Scouts, thought about Michael Williams coming into the draft. So, didn't have the year that they thought he would, a bit. He dealt some injuries. The position change didn't go quite as swimmingly as initially hoped. But the sky's the limit, right? You know what the possibilities are, the length of measurements. I think the athleticism is there. But certainly, it reminds me a little of Trayvon Walker. Funny enough, Trayvon went number 1. They both went to Georgia. Scout the player, not the helmet. I hate saying that, but reminds me a little bit of Trayvon Walker, where you're kind of banking on the traits. And Trayvon Walker is a good football player, better than he gets credit for. He's always compared to Aiden Hutchinson, and that's why people don't think he's a good football player. But he is. And I think Michael Williams has a similar ceiling. When I talk about pressure on him right away, I think it was Leonard Floyd last year, right? They had a veteran in that room that they've now cut ties with, who was very productive for them. Do you remember when Drake Jackson, like a 3rd round pick for them, like had a phenomenal start? They've already cut him, right? Like he had a great start and then injury after injury. They're cutting ties. There were some maturity questions, like they released them. I mean, who's rushing the passer opposite Nick Bosa this year? It's Michael Williams on the edge, right? So a lot of pressure on him to produce. They've got nothing else in that room that could really give you anything more than like 20% of snaps a game, in my opinion, right? So a lot of pressure on him. Up the middle, I think they're okay with the veterans, Kevin Givens and Jordan Elliott, but they went out, as you've got on the graphic there. They used a couple picks, and they need immediate contributions from them as well. Alfred Collins is a big-bodied guy at Texas, really good run stopper. I think there's some untapped potential there as a pass rusher, but he's got to put it together. I think from a technique perspective and a pass rush plan perspective, it was a bit lacking at times this past year. So he's got to get better there. I think he's going to get a chance to play a lot for them. I look at a guy like CJ West, was one of my favorite late round picks in this draft. He was downright dominant at the East West Shrine Bowl. Really good stuff on tape. I think he's going to end up being one of the steals. But look at this. This was, all 5 picks on defense, and I think all of them are going to have to play. Nick Martin, over at ESPN's depth chart, they've got Nick Martin as a starter at linebacker, and he probably will be after they lose a guy like Dre Greenlaw. Yeah, right. He's going to have to be. And then the secondary is really fun to talk about, because I think it's going to be good, but it's also okay to put your hands up and go, well, I don't know, right? They've got, your safety tandem in Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa, like super young guys. You lose Talanoa Hufanga, who didn't play a lot of ball for them last year, in all fairness, but I thought Jair Brown was going to be really good for them last year, and he was just okay, right? I don't think he took the step forward that they thought he was going to take. Malik Mustafa is getting back from an injury, right, that he dealt with last year.
Yeah.
They bring in a couple of veterans, right, Richie Grant and Jason Pinnock at safety, who are just guys, right? Like they're not going to get you killed if they've got to play, but they're not difference makers, right? So I thought I actually wrote a recent article. I think there's room for them to make an addition here at safety. I linked them to Julian Blackman, who's probably the best free agent safety on the market and has some history with their new assistant head coach. Gus Bradley was his DC in Indianapolis for a couple of years. I think there's room for them to make a move here, but I also think they might be satisfied with what, Pinnock and Grant gives them if they've got to play them instead. But you look at corner, again, you lose Charvarius Ward, who I thought was a phenomenal football player for them. Great corner, signs a big contract in free agency with the Colts. So you're relying on a lot of these young guys, right? Renardo Green, who I thought looked really good last year, probably does take a step. I always butcher his name, but Diamador Lenore is a guy that I think is a good football player. He's played a little inside outside. I think they're probably going to need him to play on the outside predominantly this year. I think the starting nickel is going to be who you got up on the graphic there, Upton Stout, the DB out of Western Kentucky, undersized, was really good at West Kentucky this past season, was really good at the Senior Bowl as well.
Yeah.
Put up some good numbers on tape. I'll give you a fun fact. This guy's attitude is what I imagine they were drawn to. I got to have a lot of conversations with him throughout the pre-draft process. He ran more reps at the Senior Bowl than any other player in attendance. They were a little short-handed there at DB. Line me up and rep me up. He didn't give a damn. He went out and told them, give me as much as you'd like. And they put a lot on his plate. I mean, he's playing corner, safety, and nickel at the Senior Bowl. So I think he's going to be the starting nickel most likely. Trey Brown, you'll know as good as anyone. Intriguing free agent addition. Opened last year as a starter for Seattle. Ends up getting hurt and loses his job as the year goes on to Josh Joby, who came in and played well, re-signed this year with the Seahawks. So Trey Brown comes here as a bit of a bounce back candidate. Like I look at this group of corners and it just feels like a bring your hard hat to work type of group, right? Like it's a lot of guys that were drafted late, right? Diamador Lenore, not an early pick. Renardo Green, not a first rounder, right? Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa at safety were mid-round picks. Upton Stout, now a mid-round pick. I can't remember where Trey Brown went, but was he a UDFA or a late rounder, I believe, in Seattle?
He was in that 2021 class coming out of COVID where we only had 3 picks. And so he was their 4th rounder.
Yeah. So all of these, Darrell Luther Jr., who's played for them, like all of these guys are like 4th round picks, right? Or later. I mean, I know Renardo Green's a little earlier than that, but every other safety, every other corner drafted on this team was a late round pick. And to be fair, I think when you weigh that versus expectation, all of them have outperformed the draft slot. Like Diamador Lenore, Darrell Luther, these are better football players than where they were drafted. I would say the same thing about Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa, even though the jury's still out on them a little bit. And I think Upton Stout's going to be the same thing. So this is a workman's cornerback room, if you will. A lot of youth, a lot of questions, but a lot of hunger and a lot of good reps on tape already early on in their careers. So a really interesting unit. Of course, Robert Salah coming back as defensive coordinator, I think will be a big addition for them. Clearly, they missed him, could not replace him at all. By the way, they're like when I talk about safety, Chuck Clark is another veteran that's out there who worked with Coach Rob with the New York Jets. So there is some options, I think, to upgrade this secondary with familiar faces for the DC. I haven't even talked about the offense yet, so I'm going to switch over to that side. I'm spending so much time on them because I think they had the most interesting offseason of any of the NFC West teams. On offense, there are some things you like, of course. Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle coming back. You get Brock Purdy signed to the contract. I think it was fair. I know some people will laugh at it, but I mean, they're no better example than how hard it is to find a starting caliber quarterback. You swing and miss on Jimmy Garoppolo. You swing and miss even harder on Trey Lance. When you find one, you don't let him walk, right, for the most part. So they had to do the Brock Purdy deal. You've got a Christian McCaffrey, of course, and George Kittle, who should continue being difference makers, assuming they don't fall off a cliff. The real question here is that wide receiver, right? They trade Deebo Samuel. I think it was time to cut ties with him, but it doesn't mean you're not going to miss him. You've got Brandon Ayuk coming off that late season-ending injury. You wonder how limited he's going to be to start the year. well, what else do you have in that room, right? I'm counting on Ricky Pearsall to take a step forward as a sophomore. We know Jawan Jennings is a reliable veteran, but he's like a possession number 3 receiver who, again, might have to masquerade as, I mean, even a number 1, maybe, right? If Ayuk's not ready to start
Yeah,
the
at
year.
times.
Yeah, or certainly a number 2 at worst, right? If with Pearsall there. And then do you get anything from Jacob Cowing? You drafted him, and he didn't really give you much last year. He's undersized, maybe a bit too gimmicky to be a traditional every down guy. You feel like they've got to make one more move here, right? And lucky for them, as I said, there are a lot of guys in free agency that could help them. And you're doing a 1-year deal here, right? So you've got enough money to do it. And Amari Cooper, a Keenan Allen, and then you talk about the reputation of playing in San Francisco. Most of these veterans, they're not going to think this is a 6-11 football team. They know that this is a contending team that they would love to play for. So I'd be a little surprised. And there's always so much at receiver in free agency in June, July, and August because those productive veterans are waiting for the right opportunity to reveal itself. So I think they got to make one more move here. It'll be interesting to see if they do. I'll close out with the offensive line. There's a lot of continuity up here. I think it'll be a good, maybe not elite offensive line. There's still some questions in the interior, but I will say Dominic Pooney, sophomore right guard, I think has a chance to develop into one of the better guards in the NFL this season. Trent Williams, I mean, what's it? That test you take where they assess your actual age. I mean, Trent Williams has to be like 24, right? Like this guy's
They're
not
counting on it. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense when you turn the tape on, right? Like he's still playing at a high level. I'm never comfortable predicting that he's going to fall off. I've got to see it to believe it, right? So I think this O-line will be good, maybe not great, but they've got some elite difference makers in Trent Williams, and I think Dominic Pooney takes that step this year as well.
It certainly seems like as we look ahead a little bit to next year that they're setting themselves up where offensive line might be the priority next year. I know San Francisco 49er fans are certainly a little nervous that they haven't addressed it in any more significant way the last 2 years than they have. They're counting on those guys being there. And it seems to me like this whole approach this offseason is they're counting on their coaching staff, right? Like they have suffered significant losses on both sides. We don't know about the wide receiver room. We don't know if CMC at this point, as he's pushing 30, can continue. Can he play 17 games? But on defense, with the approach that they took, and as a Seahawks fan, my goodness, as I kept going round by round through the draft, it was a little irritating because I thought that one of the boxes the Seahawks didn't get to check this year in the draft, they needed to add that interior defensive line, I thought. It was a good draft for big-bodied nose tackle types, and that's something they didn't come out of this draft with. But as we kept working through, the Niners kept taking those guys that I kind of had an eye on. Oh, well, Collins is off the board. Now CJ West is off the board. And what's interesting to me about that is we hear this all the time. In fact, on a recent podcast, I heard NFL veteran defensive linemen talking about this issue, that maybe as much as any other position group on the field, guys are rarely ready to go and come anywhere close to their ceiling as rookies. We even see it with the elite of the elite, that, guys that are drafted in the top 5, top 10 defensive linemen. It takes these guys a little while to physically mature. And so, you have Nick Bosa and then a whole bunch of rookies is the way you're going to fix that front seven and that defensive line. And then on offense, you mentioned some of the skill position questions. It seems like, whereas I wouldn't have been surprised if they had been much more aggressive this offseason. You're coming off a year where you only win, a handful of games. You finished last in the division when you expected to win it. Let's overcorrect, right? Maybe we'll look back and say that later that was to their credit, that they took this measured kind of approach with an eye on the future as well. But it feels like they're putting a lot of stock in Robert Saleh getting these guys to be an effective group and Kyle Shanahan being able to scheme those guys on offense.
I think so as well. And I'll add this, I also think there's a comfort level there with we can rely on our stars if they're healthy to carry us, right? They're not going to be a good football team this year if Christian McCaffrey isn't Christian McCaffrey, if George Kittle isn't George Kittle, and if Nick Bosa isn't Nick Bosa, and if Fred Warner isn't Fred Warner, right? Like Trent Williams, they've got like some real star players at certain positions. And if those guys aren't themselves, then they're not going to be able to survive. But I think they're trying to couple that with Kyle Shanahan being Kyle Shanahan. And yes, Robert Saleh, if you will, taking a big step forward. Because I think if you got to speak to Kyle Shanahan quietly, the young, inexperienced defensive coordinator that they had last year, I don't think quite met expectations, and I don't think quite maximized the talent in the room like they thought he was going to. So yeah, I think they're expecting to get a big boost from their star coaches, if you will. And when you talked about the interior D-line position, they took two of them, right, in CJ West and Alfred Collins. You talk about the Seahawks not really addressing it in the draft. First of all, I think they've got a good room in Seattle. You know, Leonard Williams being the star year that he had. They end up re-signing Jerron Reed and Jonathan Hankins. One thing that stuck out to me, by the way, this is how it works in the NFL. When they make the decision to re-sign Jonathan Hankins, I went back and I looked at the draft because I'm a nerd this way. Alfred Collins at 43 overall to San Fran, right? Right around that Seahawks pick, right? Close to it. I get later in the draft, early down run stopper like Jonathan Hankins, Cam Jackson, number 140 overall. I think it was Carolina. 2 picks before the Seahawks at 142. I'll take you a step further. Yaya Black, nose tackle out of Iowa. I think 164. I believe it was to the Steelers.
Yep.
2 picks ahead of the Seahawks at 166. I wonder if Cam Jackson or Yaya Black would be a Seahawk right now if they were on the board. And then you wouldn't feel the need to re-sign Jonathan Hankins. But I like what Seattle has in that room. I mean, they got one. They might have the. I mean, I put the Rams up there, but in the division, they might have one of the better interior D-line rooms. I mean, Leonard Williams is still a superstar, in my opinion. I think Byron Murphy's poised to take a big step forward this year. Jerron Reed, again, just one of the most underrated football players in the NFL. Like, I thought he was great this past year in Seattle, and he hasn't fallen off one bit. So a good cost-friendly, team-friendly deal re-signing him. But, you know, the sacrifice there was probably giving him the second year. I think they would have liked to give him just 1 year. But to get him on a bit of a lower number, they give him that second year, which comes with a bit more insurance and guaranteed money. And then Jonathan Hankins is going to be a good rotational guy for them as well. So I think Seattle should feel very comfortable with what they have in the interior D-line room.
All right, let's put it all together to finish it up. And after everything you said, I went into this offseason thinking that, well, my opinion hasn't changed. To me, the Rams are the most complete team. They're my preseason favorite. I expect them to win the division. All those other 3 teams, I think, are going to be battling to see who's going to challenge them or at least get the second spot. And I agree with you. I think that you can make a case they're all kind of level. They're all kind of right there. And it's going to be a really interesting race. Vegas doesn't seem to agree. A lot of the experts don't seem to agree. Despite all these questions that we just outlined with San Francisco 49ers, they all seem really willing to just put them right back in the 11-12 win category. Vegas has them as having the best odds for the most part, all the major outlets winning the division, which I find interesting. And then the Rams are probably next. And the Cardinals, Seahawks seem to be neck and neck among most of them. How do you see this division shaping up?
I think it's the most unpredictable division in football, and I absolutely love it because I'll tell you why. Well, I do agree with you that the Rams should probably be considered the favorite. They're not a 13-win team, right? This is not the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC West or the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East. Like they've won 4 or 5. The Chiefs, I think, are up to 7 or 8 straight division titles. I don't think they're in that category. I think they're probably a 10 or 11 win team. And then I think the other 3 are all in that 8 to 10 win bucket. So you can't just sit here and say, oh, this is a lock or this is a guarantee for the Rams. No, the margin is a lot closer than I think most realize. And I'd be shocked if any of these teams win 13 games. I'll lower that to 12 games. I'll be shocked if any of these teams win 6 games, right? Like, I think all of them are better than that, but not as good as, right? So curious. I'll ultimately agree. I think the Rams are the favorite, but I'll end with this because this is a Seahawks show. I don't think the offseason for them was as bad as most people think it is. When I look at Mike Macdonald's game plan, and I'm working in Tennessee covering Mike Vrabel, and Mike Vrabel's obviously not there anymore, but I liken Mike Macdonald to him a little bit, where he's this defensive-minded head coach who I think believes, and there are some negatives to this, but who believes let's play close football games every week. And if we can do that, if we're competitive every single week, I trust my team to come out on the winning end of that more often than not. That's what leads you. They had a 10-7 record in their first year under Mike Macdonald. That's a good year for a first-year head coach. Mm-hmm. They were the only team in the NFL to win 10 games and not make the playoffs. They had a good year last year, the Seahawks said. That's luck. That's bad luck that they didn't make the playoffs with 10 wins. So maybe they went too much in the opposite direction, but I do think they realized they had probably hit their ceiling with this iteration of the team with Geno Smith as their quarterback. I think it's a very different strategy this year. Swapping out Geno for Sam Darnold, as great of a year as Darnold had, I think the move is, hey, let's play a guy who's let's play with a quarterback that's a bit more risk adverse, not as much of a gunslinger as Geno Smith is, maybe not going to create as many turnovers as Geno does on a year-to-year basis. We want to run the football better. That was clearly an effort. They were one of the worst rushing attacks in the league last year. Yeah. There are still major questions over the offensive line. Maybe they should have got a little more aggressive in free agency. We know that they didn't. They almost had a deal in place. Was it Will Fries? I think it was, but they weren't comfortable with the medical. Understandably so, whereas the Vikings just handed him a ton of money. Whereas, Schneider was like, I wish I could see the medical before I do that. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, free agency is so desperate. There's so much desperation in free agency. You're not going to get away with that, right? Like, it just doesn't work that way. But I understand Schneider's, unwillingness to go that far, if you will. We'll see if they improve the offensive line enough. They think coaching is going to help get it better too, right? With a new offensive coordinator in Clint Kubiak and a very good offensive line coach in John Benton. Again, a bunch of draft picks there that are going to need Grace Bell to hit the ground running right away. But, back to my original point, I think the shift in strategy, it's more of a risk-averse quarterback. We want to improve the run game. We want to run the football effectively. They drafted another running back to be a number 3 in Damian Martinez. I thought they got great value on Damian Martinez. Yeah. I don't know how often he sees the field this year with, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet there. But I think the point is they want to make sure they can run the football. And if one of those guys gets hurt, we're still going to have 2 guys that can run the football, right? So it's going to be a run-first team. They want to play tough, hard-nosed ball. What does that do? Look at, again, the way Mike Vrabel wrote Derrick Henry. We are going to play close. The Titans played close games at an abnormal pace under Mike Vrabel and Derrick Henry at a historic pace, and they won 10, 11, 12 games every year doing it that way. I think that's the strategy in Seattle. We want to be a close, competitive football team. We want to be tougher. We want to be more physical. We don't want to turn it over. We want to win the battle at the line of scrimmage. We want to control time of possession. We want to play smart football. And Sam Darnold, I think, is better fit to do that than Geno Smith is. I think the Seahawks, again, wild range of outcomes. I mean, we didn't Cooper Kupp, DeMarcus Lawrence. Like, there's been Marcus Valdez-Scantling. There's been so much change. A draft high 11 picks. Like, so much change for this team this year. I think it's fair to say no one really knows how it's going to work out. But I would be truly shocked if the results were the. It's funny. There was so much change. I still think there's a good chance they end up in a similar spot where they're like a 9-11 win football team. But you credit them for trying to say, hey, I think we've kind of hit our ceiling here and we've got to take a different approach.
Man, I don't know how you do it covering the whole league like you do and being as knowledgeable about each and every team, but you're doing a great job over there at the Draft Network, Justin. Really love the work that you do. And thanks for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us.
Pleasure was all mine, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
I'll tell you, I got to say this, credit where credit is due. The Draft Network really exploded on the scene 5-6 years ago, made some stars out of that. The guys that originally built that thing and made it into what it is today. And then they all moved on and most of those big names from other platforms. And there was a moment there where it looked like maybe the website wouldn't recover, but they have. And that the work that they're doing over there is phenomenal. If you love the offseason the way that we do, right, and you just can't get enough content, Justin shared with me before we hit record today that even this time of year, in what we consider the dog days of the offseason, as mentioned, he's writing 8 to 9 pieces a day, not all for the Draft Network. He does some other stuff too, but talk about prolific and talk about stamina. Outstanding work from him and his staff over there. Definitely check that out. Again, subscribe to the channel if you would. It's the best way to support what I do. All the other ways that you can do that are linked down below in the description. And again, check out that Patreon page and become a member over there. Asked a bonus question of Justin, more Seahawks specific. I'll just tell you. We talked about some of his specific thoughts about the Seahawks draft class, as I'd like to just continue to get other opinions from people we haven't talked to since the draft. So if you want to check that out, that is up over on the Patreon page. You can sign up for a free membership and see if you like what you're going to get. I'll also be working on a couple other things over the next couple of days, using some all-22 film. The freedom that I get over on Patreon eclipses what I can do here on YouTube. But this is home. This is the foundation of everything Seahawks Forever is. And so I appreciate your contributions here and the engagement as well. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought of Justin's assessment around the division. Who do you think has the most complete roster as we sit here today in the NFC West? Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, as always. Until then, forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.